Test, test. I think we're live. There we go. Hello, everybody. I hope you had a wonderful week. I got hit with a pretty nasty stomach virus, but it didn't kill me, so I think that makes me stronger. I think that's how I've heard it before, something like that. But here we are, a day and a half later, but that's okay. This is a continuation of last week's, all about seed starting, and we're going to fill the gaps from last week. So last week, just to review, well, first of all, I should say, because I forgot to do this last week on the grand opening for the year, is my name's Andy. I founded Makes Edible Landscapes in 2020 to help growers like you have a successful growing experience. So there's the introduction. Last week, I talked a little bit about the history of Makes Edible Landscapes, why I started it, kind of the reasoning and the need that I saw for people who have tried to grow food and had a miserable experience, or people that were scared to grow. I know that it's not as easy as Facebook and Instagram make it look. So my whole goal is to fill in the gap and help you become a successful grower, grow food wherever you're at. So last week we talked about three traditional ways of growing food. The first one's in ground. There's a raised bed method and then container growing. We talked about three types of seeds you're likely to see when you're shopping for seeds this year. The first one's a hybrid. The second one's open pollinated. And then we also talked about heirloom seeds. Talked about a 90-10 rule that I use, where 90% of what I grow here is stuff that I absolutely love to eat. And then I save the last 10% for experimentation, whether that's a new variety, that could be a new growing method. Some years I'm already always experimenting with different growing methods. So sometimes I'm experimenting with the new irrigation techniques, new techniques for trellising. Last year I did a flooded tray for some of the grow bags to see how that would perform compared to my drip irrigation in the years past. So I usually do, like I said, 90% of what I like to eat and methods that I know are going to be successful, and then I save the last 10% for experimentation. Experimentation. Uh, Before I get too far into this week's content, I want to let you know that in the comments, I dropped a link. I made a helpful guide if you're brand new to growing food or starting seeds in general. There's a lot of really easy to follow information. Just click the link and it goes to a Canva shared tab, and it walks you through all the stuff that you need to know. It talks about stuff that we covered last week, as well as a few extra items. It's a working document, so after I get done with this live stream, I'm going to be updating that document, so it's going to be updated throughout the season. And then I also plan on sharing documents to help you as we get to different parts of the season. So right now, we're talking about setting our seedlings up for success. We haven't started seeds yet. That's not going to start until the end of this month. So if you're asking yourself, is it too early to start seeds inside of in Minnesota? The answer is yes, it's too early. We won't start seeds until the end of this month, and then we really won't start getting going until March, and then well into April. That's when the nursery will come to life. But we still got snow on the ground. It's very cold out. Even if we started seeds right now, the plants would get so big we wouldn't have room for them, and we would have some issues trying to rein them back before we could get them outside when spring shows up. So, having said that, let's jump into this week's information. The rule of thumb I wanted to share with you is when in doubt, mimic nature. So when we start seeds, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to mimic the environment around that seed, whether it be a tomato seed or a lettuce seed. And both of those seeds have very different criteria that they need to come out of dormancy. The tomato seed's what we call a warm season plant, a warm season seed, and the lettuce would be a cool season seed or a cool season plant. And both of those have differing requirements for them to break dormancy or come to life. So we'll start with the cool season plants first. Some of these plants that you might think of as cool season plants, maybe you haven't thought about them in this way, but lots of leafy greens, including lettuce, spinach, cabbage, kale, peas, onions, spring onions anyway, broccoli, and there's of course plenty more, but these are all traditionally considered to be cool season plants or cool season seeds. And what that means is these guys like it when it's cooler, not freezing temps, but they definitely don't like it when it's 90 degrees out. Now, having said that, I did mention this a little bit last week, but here in Minnesota, it's very cool that we get four distinct growing seasons, and it can be a double-edged sword because sometimes with those four distinct seasons, we get four extreme seasons. And I had mentioned last week that I have seen it multiple years now where we'll get up to Mother's Day, we'll have a pretty nice weather, and then 2 weeks later, into the first week of June, we already have 90 degrees. So let's say we have sugar snap peas that are already maybe a seedling stage. They're enjoying the 50, 60-degree weather. Once that 90-degree heat wave comes in, they're really going to struggle. And if we try to direct sow anything outside and we have sustained temperatures at 90 degrees, those cool season plants are really going to struggle to germinate. We can't control what Mother Nature does as far as temperature outside, but we can control the climate inside when we're starting our seeds indoors or maybe a basement. I start in a basement and the insulated shop, but you might have an area of your house or a basement yourself too that you're thinking about starting seeds in. You can totally control the environment for that. So that's an example of cool season plants. Once again, they like cool temperatures. They have a threshold. So this is something that I don't often hear in garden advice on YouTube channels, but it's something I wanted to share. It's something that I heard in a horticulture school was 40 degrees Fahrenheit is the threshold for cool season plants. And what that means is that cool season crops, including those ones that we covered, the lettuce, the sugar snap peas, kale, they need to have the outdoor temperature 40 degrees Fahrenheit for them to grow. Under 40 degrees, it won't kill them, but they're gonna just idle. They're not gonna do anything. So that's something you can jot down as a note is 40 degrees Fahrenheit for cool season plants as a general rule of thumb. That's their minimum temperature threshold for them to grow and thrive. Uh, we're now going to move on to warm season plants. So we have cool season 40 degrees. They like the cooler temperatures. Warm season plants include things like tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, squash, melons, beans. There's of course more, but those are some of the popular ones. These won't break seed dormancy until the temperature gets up to a certain threshold. And you'll see on a lot of seed magazines or seed descriptions, they'll tend to be somewhere around 75 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit for that seed to come out of dormancy. What that also means is that if you were to direct sow those seeds outside, the temperature would have to be close to that for them to break their dormancy. Here in Minnesota, since I always say we have a ridiculously short growing season, 115 to 140 days is kind of a ballpark range of how many frost-free days we have. If you take like a squash plant, which are typically over 100 days from beginning to maturity, that doesn't give you a lot of room on either end of the spectrum to have a successful harvest for that plant. So it's very imperative that in a growing climate like ours that we start the seeds indoors so it gives us maximum runway when we get them transplanted outside so they have enough time to finish. If we took a squash seed and direct sowed that in Minnesota late spring, we're probably not going to have enough sustained high temperature days for that squash plant to finish its life cycle. So we're going to touch a little bit more about that here in this live stream, but that's one thing I want to touch on. So for warm season plants, they love warmth, they hate cold. Their threshold for growing is 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So unlike the cool season crops where their minimum threshold is 40 degrees for them to grow, warm season plants, they need 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So anything below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, again, they're just going to sit there and idle. They're not going to die. They're not going to struggle with, there's one exception, basil. If you've grown basil before, they get really finicky when the temperatures get too cool. So typically around 50 degrees, lower than 50 degrees, you might see some discoloration of a basil leaf. It won't kill that plant, but you definitely see it in that type of plant where cooler temperatures will affect that. So there are ways you can work around that if we have a cold snap. But typically here in Minnesota, once we get the basil transplanted out, we don't really have to worry about cool season temperatures showing up again. It's not until later in the summer when we have colder temperatures, usually in September. That's when you can see some basil leaf damage. Okay, so those are cool season plants, warm season plants. Why am I saying this? Because next week when we start talking about equipment, we need to know which type of plant we're starting so we can set up or mimic the natural environment. So for those cool season plants that need the cooler temps, we wouldn't want to put, let's say, a broccoli plant. We're not going to put those seeds on a heat mat like you see in some videos because that plant is a cool season plant. However, if we're going to start hot peppers like jalapenos or habaneros, we definitely need to have a heated environment to mimic its natural environment. So a heat mat would be appropriate in that situation. Okay, so with here in Minnesota, we're basically zones 3 to zone 5. Some rules of thumbs I jotted down that I use when I'm planting during the year is I use tax day, everybody's favorite day of the year, April 15th, and then I use Mother's Day. So tax day is typically when I'll transplant cool season plants. So those are all the ones I talked about earlier, the leafy greens, the sugar snap peas, those type of plants, usually about mid-April or earlier, depending on the season. We might have a warm April. That's when I shoot for to transplant them outside. I'm saying it like that because on a lot of seed packets or in the seed catalogs, when you start reading the descriptions, and I'll actually walk you through this here in a minute, they'll give specific specifications on days from transplant. So they'll say like start seed 6 weeks before transplant. So like I said, mid-April for cool season is usually when I shoot for the transplant for like a broccoli plant, which means I need to start 6 weeks before tax day for that broccoli. That's an example. If I had a warm season plant like a pepper plant, then I use Mother's Day. And then if that was 6 weeks, it's probably more like 8 to 10 weeks. Then I would backtrack from Mother's Day 8 to 10 weeks, and then that's when I'd start those seeds. So that gives you a kind of a rough idea for here in Minnesota. What I've used is tax day for cool season transplant, shooting for that, and then uh, Mother's Day for the warm season. Now, I'll stress this again is this is the fun about growing food is that every year the growing season is different because Mother Nature is different. We never have 2 years where the growing conditions are exactly the same. So that can be a massive headache some years, but it also has a huge uh, learning opportunity. And as you get enough years of learning opportunities, you get better at predicting and then sort of working around what the weather patterns are going to do. So I wanted to share that. So if we get to spring and we have a heat snap in your cool season plants seem like they're struggling. They're not dead, and we usually don't have a prolonged heat stretch at that time of the year. The we'll usually have like a heat up, and then we'll go back into normal temperatures. I just want to caution you that it's very possible that again this year we might have 90 degrees at the beginning of June, a couple weeks after you've transplanted some plants outside. So that's that. We talked about frost-free dates. And now I'm gonna flip the camera around, so we're gonna do some shopping on some of my favorite seed catalog sites. Now that all my tech is working, which is pretty cool, because last week it was a struggle, but I'm gonna flip this over. We're gonna go shopping. Okay, gotta get some water. Okay, this is Johnny's Selected Seeds. This is a pretty big seed company. They're popular with a lot of the commercial growers. They have a lot of very good information on their website. So up here at the top, they have some different tabs for vegetables, fruits, flowers, herbs, farm seeds. They do cover crops. So they have quite a variety of things they offer for growers. They have a pretty good growers library too. So if you want to read more on certain things, they have a pretty extensive library. But back to the most of what we're going to be talking about is right here in this the vegetable section. So last week we talked about different types of seeds right here. You see this is a F1 right here. It doesn't say hybrid, but just the F1 right there, that means it's a hybrid. What that means is we can save seeds from this squash plant, but if we were to plant out the seeds from this year, so let's say we grew this plant out this year, save the seeds, next year, if we planted the seeds, they would not look exactly like the parent plant. So that's the key thing to remember on that. Down here they have different information on how the quantities they sell these in. So a packet right here, they usually have it right here. Packet is 30 seeds. This is what I wanted to see right here though. They have a most seed companies have a pretty good description of germination. So right here, their optimum germination is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. So if we were to start these squash seeds inside our house or in a basement, the optimum would be 86. We can still germinate them at room temperature, but it's going to take them longer to germinate, and we do run a risk if we have seeds that are sitting wet for too long, they could get moldy. If you haven't seen that yet, that's always the risk. So right here, days to maturity, 100 days. Usually the seed catalogs are pretty good at describing what that means here. So we have a description, average number of days from seedling date to harvest within a specific crop group. If a transplant crop, average number of days from transplant date. Not sure if crop is direct seeded or transplanted, check the growing information box for details. If crop can be both direct seeded or transplanted, days of maturity refers to direct seedling. So if we go down the growing information, they got some more information on transplanting and then direct seeding. But this is what I was saying up here. So days to maturity, 100 days. This is something too that just from experience, this number is kind of estimate. And I say that because if we have a cool spring or even a cool early summer or a cool late summer, it might take longer than 100 days for this particular variety to mature to where we actually have squash fruit that we can harvest. So with where we're at in Minnesota, 120 days frost free is a good range. That doesn't give us a lot of time of air. So if we have a cool spring or summer, we might be really tight on getting this plant to finish up before the frost comes and kills the plant off. Even like I mentioned last week, when you get towards late summer, we have the sun that's lower in the sky. The temperature is already getting cooler, so the plant's naturally slowing down. So uh, these plants like this that have over 100 days to maturity, they're the ones that I pay close attention to because I have to, I guess, front load the calendar to make sure that plant is ready to go as soon as it goes outside, so it can get maximum time to produce as many fruits as it can. So that's squash plant. Let's go over some lettuce plants. Okay, here's a good one right here. So this is something I mentioned last week too. This R right here is the trademark seed variety. What that means is it probably has a patent on it. I can almost guarantee it has a patent on it. And it's also 7.15 for a packet. So these are usually going to be more expensive when you see a trademark or a patent on them. And then you can see the difference here. So the squash, where the optimum germination temperature was 85, 86 degrees, this one's 68 degrees. So the cool thing about leafy greens, or cool season crops in general, is that most of our homes are kept at this temperature right here, which means you don't need to buy any special heat mats or heating equipment for any of your springtime plants because all of our homes, unless you like your house very warm, all of our homes are pretty much around this range, room temperature, which is what our cool season plants want to germinate. I'll say one other thing too. Certain leafy greens, lettuce in particular, carrots are another one. And for what I've kind of found over the years is the smaller the seed, uh, the more light it's going to need to germinate. So lettuce is a good one. Lettuce does need light to germinate. So if that's planted too deep in the seedling tray, you're probably going to have problems with it germinating. And when we get into the actual physical seeding trays, I'll show you what I do, but I don't cover lettuce seeds. I just drop them on top of the plugs in the trays, and then if I do cover them, it'll just be a light cover of potting soil, and then they get water, and then they do their thing. Oh yeah, I was gonna show you down here. So life cycle, we talked about this last week, the different types of life cycles. Annual, we have the biennials, which those are 2 year cycles, and then perennials. This one's days to maturity, 55 days for this lettuce variety. And I'll say something else too, that it's not always made clear on these seed catalogs, but you have to take into consideration the germination time. So some seed catalogs are pretty good at telling you basically once you plant that seed in a seedling tray, you add water and then you wait. How long does it take for that seed to come to life or break dormancy or what we call germination? Sometimes that could be 7 to 10 days. In the case of carrots, it could be 3 weeks. And that's what can be frustrating about carrots is it can take up to 3 weeks for a little carrot seed to actually germinate. And that's from what I found, carrots can be tough because if they dry out at any point in time, once you first get them activated, they're done. Seeds rarely survive if they dry out after they've already started the germination process. So if you haven't heard that before, carrots can be frustrating just the amount of time that it takes for them once you start watering them for them to actually break dormancy. Oh, here's something else too that Johnny's has on here, this thermal dormancy. Lettuce seed can enter thermal dormancy when exposed to high temperatures. Optimum germination results at high temperatures of 60 to 68 degrees. So that's basically room temperature if we're going to be indoors. So what this means is if we're in the middle of summer, and you'll see this with certain cool season plants, they'll have a window for sowing the seeds. and it usually skips July and August, sometimes September. And that's because if you were to try to plant this lettuce seed out in the middle of July or August when we have sustained 80 plus degree days, that seed's probably just going to sit there. It doesn't like the heat. And it's smart enough to know that when it's 90 degrees out, it shouldn't do anything because it's going to have a pretty rough life. But if you were to sow this lettuce at the end of the season, so uh, maybe early September when the days are getting shorter and cooler, that's probably a really good time to get a fall rotation of this plant there. Let's do kale. So you see all these hybrids, F1 hybrid, F1 hybrid, F1 hybrid, organic kale seed. There's an organic version. Here's an open pollinated, which means if we save seeds from this kale, and remember kale's a biennial, so if we planted this black magic kale out this year, we would have to let it overwinter and then it would go through its vegetative stage again the following year, and then it would produce seeds for that. 65 days to maturity for this guy. See if there's any special kale seed information in here. Days to maturity date from direct seeding. Subtract about 14 days for days of maturity from transplant. So they don't always have this information, but I always love more information than less. They got transplanting information in there. And some of these will have insect pest information. And then they also have this little tip on here, which I think I briefly mentioned last week. Apply row covers. I love row covers. I use it with all my customer CSA gardens. And Johnny's also sells row covers too. So, all right, there's some cool season stuff. Let's go some warm season plants. So see all these hybrids. F1, F1, they're all hybrids. Okay, sun gold. This one right here, I love sun gold. It's my favorite orange cherry tomato. Oh man, this one, if you like sweets, if you're a sweet type of person, I encourage you to try sun gold. It's an indeterminate plant, which means it's going to be a vining one. But in Minnesota, since we have a shorter growing season, it's not going to get crazy out of control because we just don't have a long enough season for it to get out of control. But this one is a great plant. Uh, 50 days, 57 days to maturity. So we talked about indeterminate and determinate type of plants last weekend. This is the indeterminate plant. So this 57 days is basically to when your first round of cherry tomato is going to come on. But since it's indeterminate, it comes in waves. It's going to keep on growing, making flowers, producing fruit, and then it repeats, and then it repeats, and repeats. Warm season, so you see the optimum germination temperature there again. Down here, there's some disease resistance information, Cerium wilt, and TMV. We don't have this in Minnesota, but we definitely have this. So this is a good handy reference too. And you're going to see with a lot of hybrids, they'll probably have some disease resistance codes on them because that's usually what hybrids are bred for, is to withstand some of the nasty biology in our environment. But anyway, sun gold. If you love very sweet sugary, high sugar content tomatoes, that's one that I love. And then I'm gonna show you one other one that I think I get from these guys too. Nope, I get it from High Bling. Let's go over to High Bling. So that's Johnny's. High Bling's another one that I love. These guys are organic too. Bing. There you go. Very high sugar content. So again, if you like very sweet cherry tomatoes, Sun Gold was my favorite gold one. This is my favorite red one, Bing cherry tomato. It doesn't even taste like a tomato. It tastes like a some type of candy that you might buy off the shelf at at a convenience store. But Bing cherry tomato, it's indeterminate too, so it's gonna behave just like the other one I mentioned, the Sun Gold. But again, it's with our short growing season in Minnesota, it won't get out of control. So High Mowing's website looks a little bit different than Johnny's, but they still got a lot of the same information here. So open pollinate indeterminate tells you those types of information. If you want to save seeds from this, you could save seeds from it. Growing information, planting depth, when to sow. Right here, they define the days of maturity from transplants. Start seeds 6 to 8 weeks before planting date. So, like I was saying, here in Minnesota, my rule of thumb is Mother's Day or mid-May. So they're saying 6 to 8 weeks before planting date. So I got my handy calendar here. Let's go May May 16th will be a Saturday. Yep. Let's go 8 weeks before. So March 21st, that's where we're gonna be starting these with this variety. So if you're in Minnesota, this is how you'd calculate, or a great way to calculate it. Gives you pest information, and in the little handout that I attached to the comments, the Canva document, shared document, there's a link to the Minnesota Extension Service. They're a fantastic resource for finding any type of nasty insects that we have in Minnesota and how to prevent them from attacking your plants. And I'll keep saying this because I love them, but row covers are our friends. Actually, let me just show you the row covers. I keep talking about them. Okay, this is what I use for all of our CSA customers, the Agribon AG19. It's a lightweight row cover. This is what I use right here. This is a huge friend. What I love about this, multiple reasons. One, it's a mechanical barrier. Two, it also helps knock down the power of the sun. So it's something that you might not always think about, but some of the UV rays actually can damage plants. It won't kill them, but you'll definitely see the difference between plants that have a little bit of shade and ones that are outside getting wind whipped and then beat down by the sun every day during the summer. So it has a multiple use purpose. But the other thing is, if I use mechanical barrier like a row cover, it's cheap insurance to keep the insects off. So not only insects, but also four-legged animals, deer, bunnies, squirrels. It's kind of camouflage for the plants. If they don't know it's what's underneath the row cover, I usually don't have problems with these type of animals curious trying to knock down covers to get the plants. That's been my experience. And if I ever do have a problem with the certain critters getting into the plants with the row covers, I'll elevate the grow beds, which is easy to do with the container. You can always elevate it out of reach of, like, let's say bunnies, for instance, or squirrels. So those are row covers. Here's another company I like, Renee's Garden. If you grow in containers, they're fantastic. They're a fantastic choice for containers. They have a lot of compact and dwarf plants, and I'll share with you a couple of varieties that I like here. So right here, if you've ever seen the mini love on our website, this is where they come from right here. So they are a hybrid, so I don't save these seeds. Uh, Renee's tells you how long. So after we start watering these seeds, 7 to 10 days to germinate, and then days to harvest is approximately 70. And like I mentioned, this is approximately because every year is a little bit different as far as the growing conditions. So this might be, it tends to be longer than what's stated here. Okay, so they have information for starting seeds outdoors, for containers, sow directly into containers at least 18 inches. So this is all really good information, but like I said, I like to set the season up for success. So I never direct sow anything outside. I don't do that. The only thing I direct sow outside are carrots, because I've tried transplanting carrots in the past, and I've ended up with some really interesting, funky carrots. So S-shaped, curly Q carrots. they look they look quite interesting. But just about everything else, uh, all the warm season stuff, the big stuff too, sweet corn, watermelon, alt melons, squash, everything I start inside and then I transplant outside. And then it also helps reduce anxiety, and I know exactly what germinated. So I have done this in the past, and I just learned from experience. It's easier for me to start everything indoors, like I said, with the exclusion of carrots, and then just transplant. And then I know exactly what's up and running, and then I don't have to replant later. I know exactly what goes out. It's really reduced the amount of replanting and loss of plants. So that's Renee's. And if you want to peek at what it looks like from our standpoint, this is a spreadsheet a spreadsheet from a couple of years ago. This is going to look kind of maddening, but this is what I set up. I'm still using it, not this one because this is from a couple of years ago, but this is a list of everything that I plant out, and I actually have all the varieties down here, where they come from, the dates they need to start, the dates I expect them to start harvesting, and then those get summarized up here. So on February 24th of 2024, these are all the plants I started. The next one in March, those are all the plants I started, and so on and so forth. So that was the last of the seed starting information for this year. I've given you basically the bare bones on what you should know for setting your seed starting up for success this year. Next week, I'm going to start talking about equipment that I use here at the nursery and some things that you can use. We talk about popular options that I've seen people use, and basically what are the minimum things that you need as far as equipment to start your seeds. As a reminder, I dropped the link in the comments, so check that out. That's the guide that I created. I'm going to be adding to that later this week with all the information from this live stream. And then next week, I'll have a new guide for the equipment. So I don't see any questions here. I hope you've enjoyed the video today. If you haven't started seed shopping yet, now's the time to start seed shopping. By the time we get around to March, a lot of seed companies are going to be sold out in certain varieties, so I don't want you to miss the boat. Uh, but if you haven't started starting and you do want to start seeds this year, start shopping today. I gave you 3 examples of seed companies that I buy from. You don't have to use them. I would definitely recommend you use one with a good track record and know what you're looking for. So between the hybrids, the open pollinated, and the heirlooms, we've discussed those already. Make a list of stuff that you actually like to eat, and we'll see you again next week. Talk about equipment on seed starting and setting you up for success. See you later.